Hello, and welcome to a companion episode of the Ramsar COP Explained video. I am Marilisa Sanchez, International SEPA Assistant for the WWT and Regional Representative for Latin America and the Caribbean at the World Wetland Network. If you've ever wondered what really happens at a conventional wetlands COP or conference of the parties, this video is for you. Whether you're brand new to COPs or just need a quick refresher, check out our short explainer video linked in the description. In this episode, we're diving deeper into the details on how members of civil society can participate in decision-making spaces like the Conventional Wetlands COP, with insights from three fantastic guests who bring experience from Ramsar and other multilateral environmental agreements. First, we'll hear from Chris Rostron, coordinator for MedWet. He'll break down why COPs are important, what a typical day at a COP looks like, and the role of the SEPA, Communication Capacity Development, Participation and Awareness panel during COP and beyond. Next, we'll chat with Tafatsa Kurotwi, a climate activist from Zimbabwe and founder of the Emerald Climate Hub. She'll share her journey as a youth representative at climate COPs and how she found her way into decision-making spaces as a young activist. Finally, we'll hear from Dylan Jones, Australia's national focal point for the conventional wetlands. He'll give us a behind-the-scenes look at the negotiation spaces and what it's like to represent your government as a young delegate. So let's get started. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Rostron, and I'm currently the coordinator for MedWet, the regional initiative for Ramsar for the Mediterranean. I've been doing this for the last 5 months, pretty much. Before that, I was working at WWT, and so I've been involved with the World Wetland Network, and I've also been to quite a few of the Ramsar COPs and involved in the Ramsar process as well. So yeah, I have had a fair bit of experience with that.
Thank you, Chris. We know that you have a lot of experience in the COP world in Ramsar. So based on what you know, can you tell us why is a COP needed?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, COPs generally, they're not just for Ramsar, as you pointed out, but they are effectively the decision-making process of the whole Multilateral Environmental Agreement forum. So effectively, that's where all of the contracting parties, all of the countries that have signed up to the Multilateral Environmental Agreement all get together and discuss what decisions they're going to make, how they can impact on how the agreement is run. And effectively, the COP every 3 years allows them to assess the work that has been delivered, to suggest improvements in the process, and also to agree certain resolutions. So these resolutions will be voted on in many multilateral environmental agreements, but in Ramsar, they have to be agreed by consensus. So everybody has to agree. And once they're agreed, those resolutions are then taken back to the country and implemented. So it's quite important that we get them right, and that's why sometimes it takes quite a long time to do, and that's why the COP sometimes last, around 10 days in order to do all of that.
So in preparation for a COP, I've heard the term pre-COP. So can you tell us about them? How are they organized? Who can attend? And what you do there?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, there is still some debate on whether they're pre-standing committee or pre-COP, because they normally happen before the standing committee, which is where a select group of contracting parties get together and prepare things that can then go to the COP itself. So they happen by region. Obviously, Ramsar defines several different regions, including the Americas, Asia, Africa, Europe. Is that it? I think I've covered most of them. And it depends really on the organizers of these regional meetings, because for the last round, I think only one of them was face-to-face, and that was the Africa pre-COP or pre-standing committee meeting and they allowed some NGOs to come along. So we attended along with a couple of others, but they had to vote to make sure that they would allow us as observers to take part in the standing committee the pre-COP meeting itself. But others were online, and others, for example, the Asia one, I think they didn't allow NGOs to take part. So it kind of depends on the region and kind of depends on what the contracting parties vote on or how they decide who will attend it. So it's not the same for all of the regions. It does follow, the different approaches that each region has.
Does it happen in person?
The only one that is in person this time was Africa, because obviously running a meeting in person, you need a host country, you need to pay for people to get there, you need to pay for accommodation. It's quite an expensive thing to do. The rest of them, I think this time were all online. Previously, like pre-pandemic, more of them were face-to-face. So I think it kind of depends on the resources that are available. But now that it's become so much easier for people to meet online, I think they do more of that, and to a certain extent, that makes it more accessible to people. But it does mean that you don't have all of the conversations in the coffee time or in dinner or in the corridors, which is a bit of a shame, really, because that's kind of half of the value of having these meetings. I think if you want to engage in the pre-COP meetings, then the best way to do it is to contact each of the senior regional representatives who are based in the Secretariat. So they will be the ones who are administering that, and they will then be able to ask the contracting parties if that's possible. And it's more likely to be possible, I guess, if it's a relevant draft resolution going through, and there was one obviously on youth. So I think if you can justify why it's a useful reason for you to be there, it's more likely that you get a positive response.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what the day-to-day looks like at a COP?
Yep. For sure. So it's quite a structured process, the way that they do it. And obviously it evolves as the COP progresses, but normally they will have regional meetings first thing in the morning. So there will be an opportunity for the regions to get together. That's before the plenary starts. There is also a write-up from the day before, so you can check what happened the day before, which resolutions were discussed, what happened. And there will be a section on the website which gives you all the updated documents for that. Then you will go into plenary normally, and effectively at the beginning of the process, it's more around introductions. So there will be an update from the Secretariat. There'll be an opportunity to admit the observers, which is kind of us as the NGOs or the Ramsar regional initiatives. And there will also be a chance for opening statements from a range of people, which can include also civil society as well. So in the morning, you'll spend the time kind of discussing resolutions after that, which will pretty much happen to the end. And then at lunchtime, there's normally a couple of hours break for lunch, and that means that you can go to side events. So side events is really where people can promote what they're doing. They can showcase studies or best practice, and it's also open to IOPs, NGOs, whoever they want to apply for that. So you would have had to have applied for that well in advance to make sure you get a side event. And normally you would have lunch at the side event because, effectively, if you're going to spend your whole lunchtime in the side event, you need to eat. Then you go back into the plenary for the afternoon. Depending on how the plenary goes, there may well be some contact groups which then work after the plenary is finished in the afternoon into the evening, depending on whether there are things that are contentious or need extra work. And also in the evening, there will be more side events, generally speaking. So you will have maybe a reception or side events in the evening, which you can attend as well. So you can pretty much fill your day from the beginning to the end with various different activities. And for the core group, which is generally the contracting parties, sometimes with the support of the IOPs, they will then also have contact groups, often in the evening, to work on the resolutions to make sure that the next time they're discussed, they're in a fit state to be agreed.
Great, thank you. So, as an observer, could you attend side events? Can you attend working group meetings? How does that work?
In terms of observers, just running through the day, yes, normally speaking, you can attend some of the regional meetings first thing, but you have to have permission to do that. So it depends if they're discussing something which is sensitive, you may not be allowed to do that. So that's something to check with each of the regional meetings. The plenary is open, so normally then when you go into plenary later, that allows you to hear what debates are going on and look at the process of the resolutions as they get tracked through the meeting. There are sometimes where there are sensitive issues again around the resolutions, or there's a vote or whatever there is, and sometimes observers are asked to leave, in which case you leave and then you can come back in once that's been decided. For side events and things, yep, that's all open. You can attend any of those that you want, and quite often they're run by IOPs or the NGOs as well. For contact groups, that's an invitation-only thing. There are quite often circumstances where the IOPs or an NGO will be allowed to sit in on that, but generally speaking, it's the contracting parties that get engaged in that. And in terms of kind of how you engage during that meeting, if you want to kind of make interjections or you want to comment on some of the resolutions that they go through, you either have to do that through a contracting party. So talk with them first, get your point across and ask them to make the point for you. But you can also kind of interject if you're in there and you have time and they've had all of the contracting parties' comments, they will then sometimes come to the observers to ask for comments on specific things as well. But because it's kind of an intergovernmental agreement, the governments and the contracting parties get the first chance to comment.
Can you share a little bit more about what is the SEPA panel's role during the COP and also during the triennium?
Yep, for sure. So the SEPA Oversight Panel acts to kind of take an overview of what's going on across the convention in terms of SEPA activities. So SEPA in this sense is communication, capacity building, education, participation, and awareness. And there is a SEPA resolution going through this time, which is going to consolidate a lot of the existing SEPA documents and also critically to rename the program as People and Wetlands, because we feel that, you know, using an acronym for the name of a program defeats the point of it, particularly if it's supposed to be about communication. So we hope that will go through and it will have SEPA as the strap line. So the SEPA Oversight Panel meets maybe 2 or 3 times a year, I guess, looks at kind of developing new tools and resources with the Secretariat, looks at putting together the new draft resolution. And then when it comes to the COP itself, that's the chance for the SEPA Oversight Panel to meet in person if they're all there. But there is not a huge role for the SEPA Oversight Panel at the COP itself because most of the work is already been done during the triennium. There is obviously the process of selecting a new SEPA Oversight Panel, which happens every triennium at the COP. So again, the COP will see a change in some of the members of the SEPA Oversight Panel. We try and keep some for continuity. But then after the COP, there will be a new SEPA Oversight Panel. Partly because some of the SEPA Oversight Panel are contracting parties and they tend to change every COP in terms of their roles. But yeah, really at the COP, the SEPA Oversight Panel, you know, there may be a side event that they're involved in, but they don't have a huge amount to do with the day-to-day business of the COP.
You want to share a little bit about the role of WWN during COPs?
Definitely, yeah. So when I first started, the first COP I went to was in 2008. It was COP10 in Korea. Before the NGOs hadn't been very active, but they hadn't been organized. They hadn't been kind of coordinated. So that's where, you know, we got together and created the World Wetland Network. And so every time the COP comes up, we follow a similar process. So to start with, we have like an introductory meeting just before the COP starts. So we bring the NGOs together, explain how the COP works, ask them which things they're interested in promoting or following, and set up kind of an idea for the plan for the COP. Then after that, we have morning meetings, a briefing session where we talk about what happened the day before, the key things that are likely to be coming up during the day. And we also start thinking about the closing statement for WWN as well. So By the end of the 10 days, there is an opportunity to make a closing statement normally for the World Wetland Network. And that's where we say, we congratulate for people having agreed particular resolutions. And we also state, that WWN and civil society plays a very big role in delivering a lot of what the Ramsar Convention aims to do. So throughout that whole process, if there are things we want to intervene with, we work with contracting parties to do that. And we generally play a role, I guess, of support, but also if we think things aren't going the way that we think they should, if there are things that are missing, we then actively work with contracting parties to try and get that changed. So throughout the process, we're keeping in touch with each other. We're working to kind of make sure that it's the civil society voice is represented. And by the end of it, we assess whether we've done a good job on that. But generally speaking, yeah, it's a great opportunity to work in a more coordinated fashion to increase the likelihood that civil society's voice is heard at the COP.
We heard from Chris Rostron, coordinator for MetWet. Now we will hear from Tafatswa Kurotwi, a climate activist from Zimbabwe. Welcome, Tafatswa.
Thank you for having me today. My name is Tafadzwa Kurotwi, and I am a climate activist based in Zimbabwe. And for the past 8 years, I've been actively involved in climate activism and climate justice, involving young people to take climate action in their communities, as well as finding sustainable solutions to climate change through innovation and technology. And I founded an organization called Emerald Climate Hub, which is working on environmental and climate change issues in Zimbabwe and in Africa.
You mentioned having attended some of the COPs. Which ones have you attended, and sort of like what has been your role in them?
So I've attended COP 27, COP 28, and I've also attended the CBD COP 15, but it was online. So I participated as a youth delegate, focusing on advocating for ambitious reduction targets on climate change, and also ensuring there's increased finance for climate adaptation in the global south. So this is where we were advocating for more financing in climate mitigation, climate adaptation solutions in our communities. Because when you talk of the climate crisis, it's not just about the climate change itself. It's more about the environmental, the social, the economic welfare of the people in a country and in their communities. So going to COP was more of carrying a voice of those of young people who also don't have a voice, speaking on their behalf and ensuring that world leaders also take into consideration what young people are facing in their communities, and also how can young people come together, sharing ideas and partnership and collaboration, talking about solutions to the issues that we're facing in our communities. So I also attended COP 29 last year, which I went under with the party page now, where I was able to be in the negotiations, seeing how the negotiations are done and how negotiations are done between countries and other people. So it was a great opportunity, because the past 2 years I was going as an observer. So when you're an observer now, you don't have access to get into the negotiation rooms, so you don't know what's happening. But at COP 29, I was able to, sit down and also participate and listen to how negotiations are done and bring about what I think it's necessary, and what I know in the room was also a great experience representing young people in my community.
Could you tell us a little bit more about how you got there? How was it that these doors you opened these doors for yourself? How did that happen that you got into these negotiating spaces? And maybe tell us the story also of how you became, you started as an observer, but now you are able to be in these negotiating spaces. How did that process happen?
So, when I started my activism, I was at a very young age. When I recently faced drought in my communities, it impacted my life and my family. So it motivated me to advance on my knowledge and learning to ensure that how can I also speak and influence other young people out there on what I had experienced, but also how can I also bounce back and tell a story and inspire another person to take action. So I went on to, volunteer in different organizations with the likes of Elizabeth Watuti, Vanessa Nakate, and the Fridays for Future community where, sharing opportunities with other young people. But I also went on to advance to have a certificate in diplomacy with the UNITA UNFCCC to be able to have that qualification to be able to enter into those rooms. So also working back home with my government, of volunteering and also just being there, attending their workshops and being actively involved in climate action activities in my country also helped me to be identified as someone who's also, ambitious and dedicated to bring out change in their community. So when I got the certificate of being trained to be a diplomat, a climate diplomat, a youth diplomat, it also helped me to, advance from just going as a youth observer, but also getting into the rooms where the negotiations are done. Because and most of the times we want to be in the rooms, but do we have the capacity and the knowledge and the experience to be in the rooms? So I was like, you know what, I cannot keep on complaining and shouting that we want to sit at the table. We also want to be involved, but do I have the capacity to be sitting at that table? So instead of me waiting to be given a chair, I went on to, give myself that chair, get in those rooms, advance my knowledge, advance my education, and working with my government here in Zimbabwe to ensure that I also have that qualification to become a young youth delegate in these climate negotiations. Yes.
So you've talked already a little bit more about how you prepared to be in these spaces, right? What else do you do ahead of a COP that allows you to be ready for, especially for being in the negotiating rooms?
So it takes a lot of reading, it takes a lot of research, and also skill development and also networking. I think those four. But specifically on research, I think the research agenda and also key documents that position your work as an individual can make you familiarize with the latest scientific findings and also policy developments. I know at Ramsar, we already have those documents that are already up there on their website. So having the preparedness of just reading those documents, because they come in, but also it needs for you to be consistent and reading and researching on specific things that you want to learn and also want to be ready for the COPs. And also, I think the issue of skill development, just having that skill to say, I'm building relationships with key decision makers. We already have negotiators under, youth negotiators, government, NGOs, CSOs. So engaging with those when they are having their events or activities, and also just learning how these COPs are done, what to expect at COP, what to say, what not to say, things to do at a COP environment. I think that's also crucial. And also networking, networking with a lot of activists around the globe. It doesn't matter whether they are specializing in a specific agenda. Like what we are doing right now, it's a networking opportunity that also prepares one to be at COP. So also through social media platforms where young people and activists can just gather and amplify each other's voices through Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. We've seen a lot of collaboration between young people, organizations, having webinars, of different experiences that young people have faced in their previous COPs, and also how to prepare for the next COPs. But mostly that I really want to or specify on, it's more on research and reading, researching on different environmental and climate change issues, whether it's on wetlands, finance, technology. But having that knowledge, it makes you be on a better position to talk about things that are relevant to you and things that you already know. And if you're asked the questions, you're able to articulate also. Yes.
How do you prepare to talk in these spaces? Because I feel like it could be a little bit intimidating, maybe. Did it ever feel like that to you?
You know, I'm always anxious. I don't know, even with Zoom meetings. But then I tend to, breathe in and breathe out and relax because I'm still learning. It's a learning process, but then you learn as you go. So I think the thing that I do is mostly focusing on my strength, like identifying my unique skills and passions. So when I'm able to identify those, I'm able to be confident enough to approach and speak. But then also, I'm sort of like away. But at times I get scared, to say if I'm to approach or if I'm to say this, is it the right thing that I'm saying? Is it correct? But at the end of the day, I just embrace the opportunity. You know, COPs are just an incredible learning experience. You fail, you also learn after. It's a learning curve, and you can never get over learning because each day you're improving. At COPs, it's more of it's hectic. It's overwhelming. The space is very overwhelming, and it might drain you, socially and spiritually. You might drain you physically. You need to get up and be attending these meetings, but being in a space of a lot of friends and young people who are experiencing that same thing and talking about it, it gives you a relaxation to say, you know what, I'm not even alone facing this. So it motivates you to even come back better, to say, you know what, despite you having this, to being anxious or to be overwhelmed with the space, you can as well take time to break. It's allowed to, just to say, I'm taking a day off. I need to relax, and it's just like work. But even though the COPs, you cannot miss an opportunity because you'll be like, if I sleep, then I cannot be sleeping when the whole world is here. A lot of opportunities, but also taking time to yourself and just breathing in and out, resting, and um, kicking back the next day. Yes.
How have you connected with other youth in the past for this COPs?
So what I do is mostly is organizing workshops and training sessions. But it takes a lot of dedication and a lot of resources. But because something that I love to do, I make sure it happens. So also developing a common agenda with these young people, highlighting the importance of youth engagement. So organizing workshops, webinars, Twitter spaces to engage a lot of young people who are involved in environmental spaces has also made me to ensure that young people are willing. We are willing to do these things despite the challenges that we face. So I'm someone who definitely reaches out, and I don't give up. I make sure that I work it out and ensure that I also make the space safe for people to say how they feel, how they want it to be done. Social media is a really great platform for young people to connect and prepare for anything. It has made us become one because we're fighting for one thing. We are not in a competition, but we want to influence other young people who don't have a voice, who don't have access to internet, who don't have access to information. So social media has made it so easy for us to connect, reconnect, to bring about solutions and to engage on different issues in our communities. Yeah.
Could you tell us if you're leading any youth groups who are attending the COP?
So right now, as Emerald Climate Hub, we have connected with different organizations in Zimbabwe. We are working with BirdLife Zimbabwe. We are working with Africa Youth Initiative on climate change in Zimbabwe. We are also working with UNESCO. So from last year, we were able to engage young people in the Ramsar sites that are in Harare, that are in Zimbabwe. So in Zimbabwe, we have 7 Ramsar sites. So we are just having fun activities on how best we can bring about, education on wetland restoration. We are also working with university students, the University of Zimbabwe and Catholic University, as well as Chinwe University. So we are working with a lot of young people who are not just working in wetlands, but are also part of the problems. We're also working with young women who are in the indigenous knowledge communities, bring aspect of indigenous knowledge systems in wetlands history. We were doing cleanup campaigns as well as tree planting, because the issue of waste has been a problem in our wetlands. The waste is going into our wetlands.
What do you think should be the role of youth in the upcoming Ramsar COP, and what do you expect to contribute to?
What I would expect to contribute is a resolution or a position paper of a lot of young people, not only in Africa, but across the globe, on the demand that we want as young people, the demand on our ambitious targets to push for a stronger commitment to wetland conservation and restoration. So we also want it to be specific. We also want it to be achievable, relevant, measurable, and also, time. It will also be on time. So we also, that's what I'd want to bring to COP15, that we also need those stronger commitments to, wetland restoration, and also highlighting the importance of our traditional knowledge back here in Zimbabwe, that's advocating for the inclusion and recognition of indigenous knowledge in wetland management strategies, but also, promoting innovative solutions, like how best can we showcase youth-led initiatives and innovation solutions for wetlands.
What are your expectations about COP? You've talked a little bit about that, but do you have any more specific expectations?
Mostly would be my expectations are the outcomes on COP, and in terms of financing, on how we can finance and promote, innovative solutions, and also what young people, financing on young people initiatives on wetlands use and also conservation. So those are my main expectations at COP15, but also, networking and collaborating with other young people. I'm expecting a lot on that, to ensure that a lot of young people voices are amplified, and also they participate meaningfully in the negotiation.
That was Tafatswa Kurogui, climate activist from Zimbabwe and founder of the Emerald Climate Hub. Now we will hear from Dylan Jones, Australia's national focal point for the conventional wetlands. Welcome, Dylan.
Thanks, Maria. So I work for the Australian government in the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, or DQ, and I am the national focal point for the Convention on Wetlands, or the Ramsar Convention. That covers a lot of engagement with the convention itself, its working groups and its meetings. And then my section, the area I'm in, works on wetlands within Australia. So I'm in charge of Ramsar sites in some of our states, and we work with the states' governments. There's also environmental science research programs and various other issues around wetlands that come up day to day that we engage with as well.
Awesome, thanks. I know that you've been to Ramsar COPs. Have you been to other COPs? And do you want to share a little bit about what has been your role in them?
So physically, I've been to the 14th COP for the Ramsar Convention, and I've also been to the UN Environmental Assembly in 2017. And then I've helped out and been an attendee online at a range of other climate and CBD meetings, but that's a very different experience. At the UNEA COP, I was at UN Environment. I was an intern there. And so I was helping out with some of the resolutions and helping putting on some of the side events as well as doing admin. And at the last Ramsar COP, I was a youth delegate with the Australian delegation, and I was mainly helping get the youth resolution through and holding a side event for a number of the young people who were there.
Speaking about your youth, your involvement with Australia as a youth representative, how has your experience been as a young representative for the Australian government?
I mean, there's always, I think, difficulties being youth in these kinds of spaces. I think traditionally these were spaces for much older people who were, I guess, wealthy and powerful, and there was, I guess, a sense that these were closed spaces that were hard to have to gain access to. That's changed a lot in recent years. So most of the Pacific delegates at the last Ramsar COP would have been youth. There were many, many young people in our side event. But there's still, I think, cultural shifts that are needed. There, you find that there's a split, I guess. There's a lot of older people, and sometimes older people from countries you wouldn't expect, who are very, very supportive of youth work. And then you'll find other people who have progressive ideals in some ways and are doing a lot of good for the environment, who still see youth as kind of an annoying distraction or something to ignore. And so it's hard to navigate that. It can feel personal almost when you say things and you know these things are true, you've spoken to the people, you've done your research, but you get ignored simply because of who you are. That can be quite frustrating, and there's no one way to deal with that. You just have to keep trying, keep connecting, keep improving yourself, keep building. But that's very difficult, and sometimes I get frustrated, I think, by these structures that we've built around these programs, but I think it's important to try and be productive, be collaborative, and keep building relationships and keep working rather than trying to, attack things as they are, because people can react badly if you get aggressive. So it's not a good way to approach those kinds of difficulties.
We know that resolutions can only be presented by contracting parties at COPs.
Yeah.
Could you explain how an NGO or a network or a group from civil society can write a resolution and present it at COP?
Thanks, Maria. So I think there's two examples that I can think of off the top of my head. One is the youth resolution I mentioned earlier, which as part of Youth Engaged in Wetlands, we collaboratively wrote and then got some parties to submit. And then the other one I'll talk a bit about is a resolution that's proposed for the next COP on OECMs, or other area-based effective conservation measures, which was written by people in BirdLife International, but has been submitted by the UK. So I think this kind of goes back to my earlier point. For effective engagement in these spaces, you need to build relationships and connections. It's really the only way to make things work. So we wrote up the youth resolution. We consulted with a number of different young people. We got people together to talk. We did a lot of work to make a youth resolution that reflected the needs of youth, and then we also aligned it. We spent a lot of time looking at older resolutions in the convention and aligning this one with them. So it's good to make sure that what you're saying is kind of substantial and in line with what's been done in earlier resolutions in the convention. But after that, there was this long period of maybe a year where a number of us reached out to national focal points and national delegates. And often that's kind of a cold calling approach where you're reaching out of nowhere. This is probably the least effective way to reach out to national representatives, but it's also usually the only option people have. So luckily enough, we were successful in two cases. One of them, I had started working in this at some point in this process for the Australian government, and so I reached out to colleagues within the Australian government, and they were happier to hear from me for that reason. We also were lucky in that one of the people sitting in the focal point chair was quite supportive of youth work. And then the other example was, I think you, Maria, had already spoken with the Costa Rican focal point, who had been quite supportive of the youth work in some other contexts. And so I guess the two of you had gotten on pretty well. She's a lovely woman. And so I think when you reached out, because there'd already been that personal connection and there was a positive relationship there, I think they were only too happy to sign up and co-sponsor. And so I think between those kind of small bits of connection, we were able to leverage a bit more support. And then from then on, it was about, I think, just building positive connection with those people and working with them to put the resolution through. The other example I was giving on OECMs, which is current, I think there's a few things there. One of them is, again, that the BirdLife, the woman in BirdLife who drafted this OECM's resolution had previously worked for the United Kingdom government, which gave her, I think, some insight into what they cared about and how they thought. So if you can find people who've had that kind of experience, usually, at least personally, through things like the Australian Water Association's Young Professionals program or things like that, there's those kinds of networks. You can often find people at events who have the right kind of experience, and you can talk to them and ask them for advice. So for the OECM's resolution, BirdLife pulled together representatives from a number of countries who they thought would be supportive of the work in an online meeting and got their thoughts. These are the things we couldn't include. These are the things we'd like, and made sure early on that they had removed anything that would get in the way. And I should mention, we did the same thing with the youth resolution over the course of about a year. We spoke to a lot of parties about things that they wanted us to add or take out, and that's quite helpful. And so after, with the OECM's resolution, BirdLife did that, then they were able to use their direct personal connections with people in the United Kingdom government and convince them to submit the resolution. So I'd say that potentially one thing you want to be doing is to if you're lucky enough to live in the capital or to be able to join some kind of online group through the IUCN or through some kind of professional association, connecting with people is probably going to be the easiest way to get a resolution submitted. And you'd be surprised how well connected some of the people in the conservation world are. It's a small world, and so people do talk to each other a lot.
And speaking about this, connections, how do you think is the best way for young people who are, part of civil society to approach either contracting parties or even like NGOs who attend, in COP, right? How would you say would be a best way to approach with either ideas, questions, suggestions?
Thanks, Maria. I think there's a few things there. I touched on some of it earlier, and sorry for skipping questions almost, but I think for me, things that have worked and things that haven't worked. One thing that hasn't worked is going and being really demanding and saying, hey, can you do this thing? We want you to do this thing off the bat with not much connection, because most of these people are just busy and stressed all the time. And so if they can find an excuse to ignore you, they will. And I know from my experience on the inside of government, sometimes when you have people repeatedly writing really long, rambly, intense letters all the time, then after a while, people just start to ignore them. And so it can be, I think, difficult to come back from that kind of labeling. So I think just maybe in the same way you'd approach a personal relationship, getting very intense right off the bat is not a good idea. So just a word of warning. I think the best ways for me are to try and find these kind of structured engagements where people are there to talk about the specific topic you're interested in. Otherwise, I think, yeah, if you can find a young professionals program, there are things through the IUCN. So there's species survival commissions, or the Commission on Ecosystem Management has small groups like a wetland subgroup or things like this. If you can get engaged in some of those things online, and if you can be seen to be doing a little bit of work and putting a little bit in there so that you've got something solid to talk about, then people will start to take you quite seriously. And if you were to then ask for something after that, you're not just some random person, you're this person who they respect professionally. So I think it's trying to find those kinds of solid professional things. And that can be very hard at first. It's one of these things where after a little while there's more and more opportunities, but right at the start it can be very hard to find any of those opportunities. And then I think the other thing is it's a very slow, organic process that takes a lot of time. And even if it doesn't feel like things are going anywhere, for a lot of the things that worked out, it felt like they weren't going anywhere for a very long time, but we just kind of kept chipping away at them and pushing there, and things started to come together after a long time. So I'd say don't get discouraged. If you're getting messages to stop doing something, then obviously listen to those. But if you're just hanging there wondering what's going to happen next, just keep going. And eventually you do kind of, often you will find, after a long period of searching, you'll find what you're looking for. I do say, though, that with the understanding that it's a lot easier if you're in a capital city or if you're in a large city. It's a lot easier if you're in a well-connected Western country. And the way we've built the world means that it's much harder if you're coming from smaller parts of developing global South countries. And I struggle with this because we've basically set up the world so that it is harder for people from those parts of the world, and I'm not really sure how to fix that. It can be helpful to go through online networks of young people, though. That's also a good option.
If a young person wants to attend COP and wants to get ready for it, what would you suggest be the things that they do before or ahead of it? How would they prepare for it?
So I think probably the specific thing that you should do is get in touch with youth engaged in wetlands who will be organizing things going into COP. And I know that there's preparation for a kind of youth side event. And I know that last time around you got looped into young people from a whole range of NGOs and countries who are going. And so it'd be good to be connected with them and to be a part of that. I think beyond that, already most of the resolutions that are going to COP are online on the standing committee website. So 6 months before the COP, there's always a standing committee. It's next week at the time we're filming this, so late January. So those are online. So there's a number of those things. It'd be worth just spending a little bit of time familiarizing yourself with those, as well as the rules of procedure for the convention. Because that will give you a sense of how things work. Beyond that, I think it'd be worth just reaching out if you are planning to go to the focal points within your government. So on the convention's website, you can go to countries and then just find your country. And there should be both a national focal point as well as a SEPA NGO focal point. And I'd say it's worth reaching out to both of those people, just telling them you're planning to go or want to go, because they can potentially help you and loop you in. This might not always apply. I know there's some countries where potentially the government doesn't engage much with civil society, but it's worth reaching out. The Convention's international organization partners and the World Wetlands Network both have kind of significant presence at COP. So if you are working with or close to one of the NGOs that's a part of that, and you can see the list of IOPs on the convention's website, it'd be worth also just talking to them and trying to loop yourself into that. And then I think the final thing is that probably from now onwards, people are going to get serious about side events. So at the COP, there's going to be a series of side events held in lunch breaks and in the evenings after the meetings. So if you can get yourself involved in the organization or even the running of one of the side events, that can be a really good way to get to be a part of what's happening at COP as well.
Do you want to share a little bit about how negotiations happen from the government perspective?
Yeah, so it's interesting, and it probably varies a lot depending on which country you're in and also which kind of meetings you're in. At least in my experience, what often happens is, if 3 months before a standing committee, the meeting documents will go online. And for this standing committee, it included all the resolutions. So we looked at all the resolutions and we thought about kind of the issues we'd had concerns with or really pushed for. So one Australian priority right now is genuinely including Indigenous people in water management and environmental issues. And so we looked through the resolutions with that edge, and we went and then spoke to some of our colleagues working on those issues and got recommendations from them. We got recommendations from a bunch of other teams in the government who worked on migratory species or various other things. And then we tried to pull those together into, these are the things we want to change, and these are the things that we can't accept. And then for us, we're very close with some countries who we've worked with. And so before the meetings, we try and set up a little meeting with those countries and work out, are we on the same page for these things? Do we disagree? But then you go into the meeting and suddenly you realize all the different views that other people have. So I think then there's a long process of kind of going backwards and forwards on certain things, trying to say, hey, if we tweak this and you tweak that, is that okay for both of us? And then there's just this very long process of going through and tweaking bit by bit. And that always, from what I've seen, always seems to end up with all these long nights and everything's moving really slowly and nothing's ever coming together. And then the meeting's about to end and everyone realizes, oh gosh, we've got to get stuff done. And then suddenly everything happens really quickly. So it's not a fun process. It's not enjoyable. And it's not glamorous either. It's kind of sitting there for hours trying to decide whether to capitalize a word or put a comma somewhere, and in a room with people, and you're tired and stressed.
And I would like for you to explain to me
is
what hallway conversations or negotiations are.
Yeah, I think maybe the best way to describe it is we're used to just at any moment in the meeting, you might run into someone and that's your opportunity to give them kind of the elevator pitch about what you're trying to do or to ask them about a certain issue. And the thing is, because if you're sitting in the meeting, you've got to press a button and then it gets to you and then you make a statement in front of all the other people in the meeting. It's really formal. It can be very hard to have a proper conversation. It might be 5 minutes before you get a chance to speak again. Usually it's a lot longer. So it's much quicker and easier just to be chatting with people kind of informally and then to go back into the meeting and do something formally. So I think that's kind of what it is. The only issue is, I think if you're in government, you need to watch what you say in the corridor conversations, because you don't want to say, oh yeah, that'd be great, we can do that. And then you go back and find out that you can't actually do that. So
since we're kind of like wrapping up, what would you like to tell young people who are planning to attend the next Ramsar COP for the first time?
So I think it would be come with enthusiasm, come willing to engage and connect as much as possible, be a part of everything and try and dive into everything, because then within that and within those connections, you might be able to find some ways to do some good things that make the world a better place. And then the other one is I just say yes to all the social opportunities if possible, but it'll be a big week as well. So kind of pace yourself and look after yourself. Yeah.
in regards of youth engagement,
Yeah.
what are your expectations for this Ramsar COP? Seeing that, the youth resolution got accepted last COP,
Yeah.
what are your expectations this new one?
So we have a youth resolution going through, which kind of builds on the earlier youth resolution and continues its work. So the youth working group is kind of building momentum, but it feels like it's about halfway through, maybe a little less than halfway through the work plan it has, which has lots of different items. There's various consultancies and things happening to kind of bolster the youth work. So we want to get that new youth resolution through to continue that work. And one of the things it does is try and formally create space for youth in all the bits and pieces of the convention. So in the scientific and technical review panel, in the working groups. And so that will hopefully create spaces where if you're a young person and you're not super interested in youth engagement, but you are interested in wetland conservation or waterbird science or something like that, to try and create spaces for young people to kind of directly engage with the work of the convention as well, which I think is just kind of creating more space for them to be there. So hopefully that goes ahead. Otherwise, we will host a youth side event, and so hopefully that builds a lot of traction and that can kind of engage people quite a bit. And then I think personally, I'd like to just build connections between all the young people who are coming to try and maybe create a group chat or something where everyone's sharing ideas and connecting for lunch or for afterwards for various things, and to try and build some connections there that can last after the COP. So the youth engaged in wetlands itself kind of formed out of people who'd met at COP. So hopefully we can kind of continue that tradition.
That was Dylan Jones, Australia's national focal point for the Convention on Wetlands. And that brings us to the end of our episode today. If you need a refresher on Ramsar COP, please visit our explainer video. The link is in the description. For more details on the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, visit their website, ramsar.org, or explore the introductory course to the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands on the Infor MEA platform. You'll find both links in the description below. Finally, if you are a young person aged 18 to 35 planning to attend the Ramsar COP15 in Zimbabwe, consider connecting with Youth Engaging Wetlands, a global network advocating for meaningful youth representation in decision-making spaces like COPs. You can reach out through their social media channels or send an email to youthengagedinwetlands@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.